Hello everyone, it's Silver. This is the Ninth Dawn remake. So, the Ninth Dawn games are a trilogy of indie open-world RPGs that are pretty well regarded, but I've never actually played one of them. But I'm fixing that now with this one. So they are pretty ambitious games, I would say, because the open worlds in them are quite large and actually filled with lots of content. But I also think I understand the idea behind remaking the first one now that the third one has been out for a while and stuff. And I think the idea might be I've learned a lot in the past several games that I've made, so I kind of want to restart back where it originally began and see if I can do it better. Because I'm guessing after, several games worth of iterating on your ideas and learning dungeon design and map design and all this stuff, I'm guessing they feel like they've learned a lot and probably have a better grasp on certain things and just overall think that they could improve stuff a little bit if they went back to where they started. First off, how it looks and sounds. It looks pretty solid, in my opinion, for an indie RPG, especially one of this scale. I like the way that your characters are flat, so that when you turn left and right, you sort of turn around like a piece of paper. I think it's a cute little touch, and a lot of the very sprite-based monster designs have a lot of character to them. They have a decent amount of little animation that happens as they're doing stuff, and their sprites just look really good. They're well drawn, you can tell what they're supposed to be, and there's some pretty cool ones later on in the game and when things get more advanced. Overall, it's probably an art style that you could call utilitarian, and that it kind of does what it needs to do and not a lot more, but I also think it does have a little bit of extra charm that adds to the game, and a lot of that is due to the silly sort of bobbing around animations and little details like that, especially with how it looks when you're mounted on a camel, by the way, of course it's camel, and you just sort of violently jitter up and down as you're riding on it. It's pretty funny looking. But you've also got the music, and the music is a bit different. I would not call its soundtrack utilitarian at all. In fact, it's actually quite good. And this is actually a point that is in regards to all of the Ninth Dawn games. They have good soundtracks that were made specifically for them. It's not like stock music or anything. It's actually composed for the games, and it sounds great. It's got a sort of dark fantasy, wandering the world kind of theme to a lot of it. I like the fact that a lot of the towns have their own unique soundtrack related to them. It gives them some extra character. And I found that the rest of the soundtrack, the exploration and dungeon and boss music and all that stuff, is pretty good stuff that keeps the kind of sweeping fantasy kind of idea going on with a little bit of dark humor in there in terms of how the game is written and stuff. So that's also reflected in the kind of darkly whimsical aspects of some of the soundtrack. It's a pretty nice soundtrack, and I can see why they sell the soundtracks separately if you want to buy them for all of their games. But in terms of the structure of the game, it's a very open RPG. It's not just that it's open world, it's actually just quite open in general. You do not have a main quest line that takes you to very specific places in a necessary order exactly. You have a main quest that you can follow throughout the towns and throughout various dungeons and stuff, but there will also be other places, other towns and dungeons that you can visit along the way if you choose. So I guess you could say it's almost like in the Bethesda mold of a main quest, where you are free to just blow it off for a long time and go exploring if you want to. Although in this case, there are areas of the world map that are blocked off until certain story flags open them up. After you create your character, you'll be able to choose some basic stats and things just in terms of how I want to start, but the character building is also very open. You're not limited by a class or anything like that. Instead, you just have a list of stats, and whenever you level up, you'll get 5 points to put into the stats as you see fit, and you'll also be getting these things called ability orbs that are basically skill points. There is a large set of skill trees in the game that you can put these points into to develop what it is specifically your character can do. There's everything from sword and dagger skills to bow skills to dark magic or fire magic or healing spells and revival spells. There's just a lot of stuff. There's a whole bunch of things that you can find in these big skill trees, and this shows you how open the game actually is in terms of its character development. You have a ton of control over what sort of character you build into. And to facilitate this, there's also a very Elder Scrolls-like skill system where you get a skill level for just doing things. Whatever it is you're doing, you'll become better at it just by doing it. If you're swinging a longsword, then your sword skill will go up. If you're doing lots of pet taming, then your pet taming skill will go up, things like that. So you have all sorts of skill levels that will allow you to fine-tune what your character is capable of. I do wish the game had a more detailed description of what each skill actually did, because some of them are relatively obvious. You know, your fire magic skill probably makes your fire spell stronger, but some of them are less obvious. Like, what does the pet taming skill do exactly? Does it give them more health? Does it make them more powerful? Does it make them gather XP faster? I actually have no idea what it does. I just know it consistently goes up for as long as I'm fighting with pets. So it does something. This is an example of the game's probably biggest draw as well as its biggest drawback, which is the idea that it just kind of trusts you to make your own fun. It gives you a skeleton of an adventure, a structure with towns and dungeons to follow, but it expects that you aren't just going to do that in a straight line and do nothing else. You're probably going to do RPG things and explore the world and find dungeons and kill bosses and get sweet loot and all that stuff, but you don't need a guide to go and do that. You'll just find it and do it yourself. And I think that attitude is one of the game's best points because it allows the game to be very open, both in terms of your progression through it and in terms of how you build your character. It gives you tons of options. But it's also potentially a downside if you like a more structured, guided experience. You're not going to get that here. This is a game where you kind of make your own journey. You're not a specific character with a specific name and a specific backstory. You're just person. And being just person is fine because that means you can make whatever journey you want to make. So the main structure, the way that it works, is you will arrive at a town, and this town will have some merchants for you, as well as maybe a fishing spot or some other mini-games available. There seems to be a bit of a focus on mini-games in this series, I think, from what I've seen, which I'm definitely a fan of. That's sort of an old-school way to do it, and I tend to enjoy that. And there are even mini-games in this for crafting. Every type of crafting has its own little mini-game that increases your chances of success at whatever it is you're making. But in this town will be some people with some side quests, as well as a main quest thread that you can pick up that will tell you to maybe go to a certain dungeon or make it to a certain town, but you'll find that there's something in the way of that certain town, so you'll probably have to go through a dungeon or find some sort of special gate unlocking key or something like that first. But basically, it's very open. You effectively treat the towns as like adventuring hubs where you will go in to the town itself and then head out in various directions to find all the different dungeons and stuff that are around there. And the dungeons have their own progression system that works pretty well. So once you find a dungeon, you'll see its name to let you know that you're actually in a dedicated dungeon area. Usually these head underground for a while, and then you'll lose your mini-map for a minute, and that's because every dungeon has its own map, and you've got to actually find it first. As you're exploring, usually the first third of the dungeon or so roughly, you'll find a book, and this book will be your dungeon map, and it'll unlock the mini-map in the corner as well as automatically fill in everywhere you've been so far. And this allows you to track your progress through it. This is really important because some dungeons get really large and you'll double back multiple times or go through gates that weren't unlocked before and things like that. So the map is very key to navigating. But also, when you get the map, you get a percentage. And the percentage is how much of this dungeon you've completed. And this is raised by, for one, beating a boss. If the dungeon has a boss, then this will contribute to it. Killing normal enemies does not contribute to this percentage, so you don't have to kill everything to beat a dungeon, which is nice. Or at least to clear a dungeon. And you will find treasure chests around the place. These will raise the percentage, as well as ability orbs, those currency orbs that you're going to spend to get new abilities like spells and things. And also things like switches and levers that give you progress in the dungeon. So like if you hit a button that opens a secret wall, that probably won't raise the completion, although whatever is behind the wall probably will. But if you hit a lever that raises a gate that you need to get to the boss door, then that will raise the completion. And I think really the completion is mainly tracked for just like personal preference. It is nice to know if you've done everything you can do in a dungeon, but a lot of it is more like bragging rights, right? You want to complete it because you want to get that to 100%. You want to find all the loot and all the ability orbs and things. It's just like player preference. So you'll explore outside of the town you're currently in most recently and you get some side quests and stuff, and usually these side quests involve some optional dungeons, going through those and getting some sort of key item that the boss has, or maybe just killing the boss in general and then bringing it back to the person in town and you get your reward. And then eventually you will go for the actual main story dungeon, which is usually longer, pretty much always has a boss, and it is just more complicated in general. And then surviving that dungeon will get you to the next stage of the story, oftentimes getting to the next town where you repeat the process over again and then just keep exploring outward from there. This, to me, is a pretty addictive gameplay loop because it It allows me to play at my own pace and explore wherever I want to go without the story constantly reminding me that I'm supposed to be doing something else. It just lets me explore whatever I want, which is great. Of all games, it actually kind of reminds me of Two Worlds 2, which I'm not sure how popular of an opinion that is, but I feel like those games had a kind of a similar structure to this, and to that point also you could say Gothic a little bit as well. They had sort of a somewhat similar structure to them. I did mention minigames, so while you're in town there are several other things you can do, so it's not all fighting. As well as gathering all this sweet gear and all these new abilities and things, you'll also have to craft some stuff and some other things if you want to. And crafting, depending on the type of crafting you're doing, like normal blacksmithing style crafting or like alchemy style crafting, they have their own minigames and their own lists of things that you can make, and as you level up the skill by using it more and more, you will get more and more recipes and craft better and better stuff. But you of course will need higher and higher rarity components to craft this better stuff, so eventually you will be blocked off from getting any further until you start fighting stronger monsters to get all of the better quality materials that you need. I would say that no matter what kind of character you're rolling up, crafting skills are a useful thing to just delve into, in the same way that they are in a game like The Elder Scrolls, or a series, I suppose, like The Elder Scrolls, because crafting in those games is also often something you want to splash into no matter what specific type of character you're making. It's just too useful, and that's the case here. You can craft weapons of a drastically higher tier than you'll be able to find in the towns you're currently in for sale. Although I'm guessing the best stuff is probably still found at the end of dungeons and things, you can still make some really good stuff via crafting, and also potions are just nice to have, so alchemy is useful too. This is also the only game I've ever played where the fishing minigame is Vampire Survivors, but it is. The fishing minigame is a Survivors-like, and you go around with various kinds of worms and fight off a bunch of fish, and every single fish that you kill in the minigame, you catch back when the minigame's over, and there are even various levels of this minigame that you can unlock by finding new fishing spots and things. It's pretty cute how much effort has been put into the fishing minigame, so I like that it's there. There's also the pet raising stuff that I kind of briefly mentioned earlier. There's a surprisingly in-depth pet system in this game where you can have up to 8 active slots for pets to run around and fight with you. And they're very powerful oftentimes, so you definitely want to raise them. And you can have more than 8 on you at any given time because they have their own sort of storage slots, but you will only be able to have 8 active at once. And you just find pet eggs and hatch them, and when you hatch them you get a level 0 basic pet of whatever kind the egg was. And then as you gain experience by fighting, they gain XP too, and they will eventually level up, and as they level up they'll just get stronger in general, but also you can evolve them, and every pet has a large tree of evolutions they can go down, and once they get to a certain level threshold you can evolve them up the next step, and doing this takes different kinds of resources depending on what you're changing them into. So it's kind of like a species, like a monster species. What exact resource you need is determined by what species they're becoming. But after you evolve them, they'll start back down at level 0 in their new form and get even stronger from there, and then eventually they'll get to a higher level threshold and you can evolve them again up to a more advanced form, and just keep going until you get to the end of the different trees, which have some truly very powerful, like legendary monsters in them for you to have on your team, which is really nice because the bosses and stuff get really strong in this game and tend to have a lot of health, so having more power on your side is always a good idea. This is also the kind of game that would be really fun in co-op. The game does have local and online co-op so that you can dungeon crawl around with your friends and probably make ridiculous builds and overpower huge bosses and things. Overall, I really like the Ninth Dawn remake. It makes me want to play Ninth Dawn 3, which I don't actually own, but I would like to try the third game, the most recent non-remake in the series. I definitely would like to try it out. Knowing how much I liked this, I have a feeling that I would also like the later entries as well. And it does make me wonder if the developer is going to remake all of them, if they're going to do like a full trilogy reboot and then do a 4th or something. I have no idea what their plans are, but hopefully they continue to make games because they're obviously quite good at it. I really enjoyed my time with the Ninth Dawn remake, and it'll probably stay on my Steam Deck as something to occasionally dungeon delve into. And I think it's also kind of a neat precedent to set that it's okay for indie devs to remake their own games as well, because right now we think of a game remake as kind of a AAA gaming space thing, but doing it as an indie dev also makes a lot of sense because chances are you've learned a lot since you made the game, and it might be fun to sort of do a do-over. I have a feeling a lot of the do-over idea for this one was in the dungeon design. It seems like the developer is quite proud of their dungeon design, and they should be. They're fun dungeons. They're really long oftentimes, but they don't feel monotonous or repetitive. They're just fun designs to crawl through. They're good action RPG dungeons, I feel, in like a 2D format. So I have a feeling that the dungeons in the original Ninth Dawn maybe were a lot more simplistic, and the developer just wasn't as happy with them. So that's something that they put a lot of effort in with the remake to rectify and even add entirely new layouts and stuff too. So I will put a link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for the Ninth Dawn remake if you guys wish to check it out yourselves. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.